folks. Welcome to the Life Hacks Podcast, where everyone is a student of life. Sometimes we get life completely right, and sometimes we get it completely wrong. I am your host, Steve Smith. On today's episode, it is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome my next guest to the podcast. He is a family court circuit judge in Wood and Pleasants counties in West Virginia. He was elected to the 3rd Family Court in 2002, re-elected in 2008, and again in 2016. He has been a juvenile drug court judge since 2010. He has also served several years as a mental hygiene commissioner and also as an assistant prosecutor in West Virginia. He has a bachelor's degree in political science from the West Virginia University and a law degree from the West Virginia University College of Law. He was also selected by his peers of 47 other judges to be president of the West Virginia Family Court Judges in 2018. He is also a well-established family man, a father, and a husband. And last but not least, he is the only true diehard West Virginia Mountaineer sports fan in the world who refuses to watch the Mountaineers play in big games in fear that he might jinx the team into losing. When the Mountaineers do lose a game, you can bet the farm that he was secretly watching it. Ladies and gentlemen, please give your undivided attention and a warm welcome to my very special Life Hacks guest and my fellow Pennsburg Cardinal, the Honorable Judge Darren Tallman. Welcome to the show, my man.
Thanks, Steve. That's probably one of the best introductions I've ever had. And yeah, that's great. It is an inside joke among my friends, and I think even my family's caught on that. I'll get text messages sometimes during a West Virginia game. Dad, are you watching? Darren, are you watching? I'm like, no, I'm not watching. It's like sometimes it's uncanny, especially the basketball team. I can tune in. Oh yeah, West Virginia basketball's playing. And maybe it's midway through the first half, and they're up by 15 or 16, 20 points. And as soon as I start watching, I see that lead start dwindling, and I switch the channel again. So yeah, it's kind of a running joke, and some of my Facebook friends, they always they'll get on to me every time West Virginia loses, and yeah. I'll bet you watched.
Yeah, I did some background checking on you, and I caught some of your Facebook posts, and I thought, this guy's got a history of spoiling the Mountaineer game. Yeah. So
I actually have a man cave that is decked out in I have almost every West Virginia memorabilia that Bond's Drugstore probably ever sells.
Really? That's awesome.
It's blue and gold paint and the whole bit. You walk in, there's no doubt who I root for. Yeah.
So tell me this. Was you watching the game back when Pat White and those guys were playing Pitt? All they had to do was win that game.
I was there.
Was you really?
Oh, one of the worst days of my life, yeah. And my son's caught on too. He still says it was one of the worst days of his life. Wow. He was just a little fellow then. The joke was when I first started taking him to games, my son Christian, when he was like 3 years old. And he would attend about one game a year or so. By the time Pat White and them started playing, he had never seen West Virginia lose.
Wow.
In fact, he went to the Sugar Bowl with me down in Atlanta.
Nice.
And so West Virginia was like 15 games before he saw West Virginia lose. I think he actually was there when we present when we lost to South Florida.
Yeah.
I think was actually. So the Pitt game was like the second game, but that was
awful, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we all knew. I think everybody in the country knew. They're going to breeze through this game. They were even talking about where they're going to get ranked after they beat Pitt. Remember all that?
I didn't have tickets to that game, and I wasn't going to go. And a friend of mine called. My son had already gone with his friend from school, and the dad called and said, "Darren, I got 2 more tickets." And of course, the game was a night game. So he calls me about 3 o'clock and he says, I have 2 tickets if you want them. So my oldest daughter was there at the house. We literally jumped in the car and took off for Morgantown. In fact, I got pulled over for speeding in Ritchie County by the bailiff of my court.
You're kidding.
The deputy that worked in my court as a bailiff, he looked at me and he started laughing. And he saw my West Virginia stuff on. And he said, Judge, just take, of course, he didn't write me a ticket.
Right.
He said, just take it easy. He said, there might be another patrol up around Doddridge County. So, and I wasn't going that fast, about 75. I'm not a fast driver, but I was going 75 to get up there. And yeah, so that's kind of a funny story. If I have the deputy pull up, and it's the guy that was your bailiff in your court the week before, you know.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, you might be new to my show. What we do here at the Life Hacks podcast, we just talk about life. My whole purpose of this really is just to, talk about things that everybody goes through in life. I mean, it's really a simple concept, but, we're all students of life. We're all teachers of life, and we're all leaders of life. And we're all stumbling and struggling every day to get through this thing called life. Mm-hmm. Some days we have it mastered. You know what I'm saying? Some days it's a complete bomb. But the purpose is just sit down and just talk about things. I mean, I can learn every day if I embrace it, and if I talk to people, if I listen. Being a great listener is what it's all about, in my opinion. And no matter what age you are, I mean, you're a few years older than me, obviously, but, everybody has an opportunity to learn and get better at life. And then they can transition that into teaching somebody and then leading or mentoring that person into a better life. That's the whole purpose of the show. So anyway, I want to welcome you, and I appreciate you coming down. I know you have a busy schedule. Today's Veterans Day. You had the day off, but, I really appreciate you coming down. I just want to thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. And one of the attributes, or one of the most valuable things you can be as a judge, is be a good listener. Of course, I'm a family court judge.
Yeah.
And what I like to tell people is people really don't realize how important family court is, unfortunately.
Right.
Because, when I've had to run for judge, family court judge, I've told people, I said, our terms are 8 years. I said, probably more so than any other court, maybe magistrate court, you may be involved, you, family member, close friend, neighbor. In that 8 years, you're probably going to be involved with or know about, be familiar with a family court case.
Sure.
And that's why, and we deal with, a lot of, kind of emotional issues.
Yeah, I bet.
And it's important sometimes to listen. Absolutely. And you hear a lot. And I tell people, I said, unfortunately, isn't it unfortunate we have to have a family court? I mean, in a perfect world, there would be no divorces. There would be no child support. There'd be no domestic violence. But here we are.
Yeah.
And it's very important for us to have the right people, in there.
Sure.
And I tell people, you hear a lot of people criticize judges, and judges we're like computers, junk in, junk out. When you hear maybe a questionable decision, how did the judge figure that? Remember, you're probably hearing from one side. Right. You don't know what the other side, had to say.
Right.
And in fact, and you have to stop me because I'll just end up rambling about my court. But
we'll get into the court in a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, let's get this show started. And what I like to do, I like to dig into your history a little bit and just start kind of getting into how you got to where you are today. So I want to start off with this. You have 5 brothers, 6 including yourself, correct?
Yeah, I'm the oldest.
Right. All right, I want you to tell me the answer to this question. Who is the most athletic Tallman brother in your family?
Oh.
And be truthful.
Pound for pound, I think Tracy was probably the best football player I ever saw. I mean, 135 pounds, and he gained over 1,000 yards 2 different years, for Ritchie County.
Yep.
And, but he was so small, but he was also a pretty good baseball player, too.
Yes, he was.
I would almost have to guess Tracy, though Jamie was pretty good, too. Jamie was a quarterback for Pennsboro. He didn't have a real good team around him, but, Jamie would have to run the ball on 1st and 2nd down and throw it on 3rd down his senior year. So as far as, and of course, he's a coach at Union High School up in Grant County and been an athletics director up there, been up there 30 years now. He's probably the best overall, all-around athlete. And I hope he never listens to this, that we had. Of the six of us, though, we all played.
Yeah.
I mean, we all played. I mean, Michael played football, and he was on the line, and he was a captain his senior year at Pennsboro. And, of course, you're familiar with Tracy. Tracy was so short, he didn't play basketball. Chris played a little bit of basketball, a little bit of baseball. Jason actually played for Ritchie County a couple of years. Came down and played for Perrysburg Catholic one year. It's a long story behind that. But he ended up making honorable mention All-State as a nose guard. And, of course, his son recently played for Williamstown.
Right. Yeah, he was a stud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, he had two sons play for Williamstown, I should say. So, yeah, Trenton was the quarterback for Williamstown, and he played on their state championship team, started a few years ago then, too. And then Caden just graduated from Williamstown, and he played both ways for Williamstown.
Yeah, very athletic family. Very athletic family.
We have a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely.
We had a lot of fun growing up with backyard football, too. I mean, somebody was always hurt or crying.
I think I got to participate in a few of those as a young kid. Oh, for you guys that don't know out there, I am distantly related to the Tallman family, and we all grew up in the same town and went to the same high schools. So Darren's youngest brother, Chris, and I graduated high school together. So we have a connection that's a little deeper than just me meeting Darren, the judge, today. So
yeah, and no jokes about everybody being related to everybody in Ritchie County or West Virginia, but yeah, we are. We're distantly related, and then we all grew up kind of together too.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I got another question here for you since we're talking about your brothers. All right, who is the smartest Tallman brother?
Now you are going to get me in trouble. I probably have I've got the highest degree, with my law degree, but I never count that as a measure of actual intelligence. My brother Michael's pretty sharp. He graduated from WVU, and then he works in Maryland and kind of runs the whole camp, and he shows he's pretty sharp. Of course, Jamie graduated from WVU. He's the athletic director. Tracy runs his own business there.
Yeah.
And I've been amazed at how much he's accomplished, and he's a great father. And
sure is. And
it's hard to say. I mean, it really is. I'll exclude Chris.
That's hilarious. Well, that leads me into another question. I got one more for the Tallman brothers. Which Tallman brother is the alpha male of the group? Who takes all the lunch money all the time?
See, we were kind of separated in ages. I'm 16 and a half years older than Chris. So we kind of come in twos. So I probably took Jamie's lunch money. Michael would have taken Tracy's. So they were pretty close in age. Tracy probably took Jason's. Jason probably took Chris's. Right now, Jason's the ex-Marine.
Yeah, yep.
And Jason's the one, that kind of, his mentor's Donnie Baker, by the way. When he does a Donnie Baker imitation, that if Donnie Baker's coming to Perrysburg, we're going to take Jason and dress him up like Donnie. But yeah, we kind of take turns. I mean, I was older, so for a long time, I guess I was. But it probably moved. It's probably a moving target. It probably moves around some when we're together.
Well, let's break it down like this. When you guys meet for Christmas or Thanksgiving or Father's Day or any of these big gatherings, who is the one getting all the guys to get around for pictures and telling people, hey, over here?
That's me.
Okay.
That's me.
Like we said, folks, this Tallman family's huge. They have a history back where we grew up. Everybody knows them. Everybody knows they're great athletes. Everybody knows they're great people. I just thought I'd give a little, I wanted to hear from the man himself what he thought of the Tallman brothers.
We're a close bunch. I mean, we have a little a chat, text chat that we get on, about every day. And tomorrow's Chris's birthday, by the way.
Oh, is it?
Tomorrow we'll all get on to him, and
yeah.
and probably post silly pictures of him or something. We all have blackmail stuff. You know?
Yeah. All right. We're going to get into some more questions. Start talking about your history a little bit. Who was the most influential person in your life as a teenager when you were growing up? I mean, who was it that just, gave you that beacon, that light bulb that went off and was like, that guy right there, you might not have known it right away, but later on, you realize that guy directed me greatly through life.
It would have to be my parents.
For sure.
Growing up in Ritchie County. And then, I had grandparents, and they all influenced me in a different way. And I had some teachers, in school. You might even know Louis Cottrell.
Sure. Absolutely. I had him in school.
I grew up with him, and Brad was his son, and he's Tracy and Michael's friend. But I had probably my parents. My dad still inspires me because, he's 87 now, and he's had a stroke, but he's still, he's teaching me still how to grow old.
Yeah.
And growing up, Dad had that quiet strength where, he didn't have to, he never had a temper tantrum.
Yeah.
I've had more temper tantrums as an adult than he had.
Really?
and then, of course, I had grandparents, and I never knew my grandpa Tallman, but I had extended aunts and uncles, and those people had a big influence on my life. You and I talked before we got on the air about all the people in Pennsboro,
wow.
that were different times. Now, when I went to college, I had a work study job for the Department of Religious Studies at WVU. And, I helped grade papers. I made copies. I just did little things. It was 2 hours, 10 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up doing that for my whole 4 years, 5 years actually, of undergraduate.
Nice.
And I ended up being friends with the two professors that were in that department, Dr. Manfred Meitzen and Dr. Alan Jenks. The interesting thing about those two is they both spoke like 5 languages.
Wow.
And they could read Hebrew. They could read Arabic. That I would look and they would take the time when they saw I was curious, and I got to spend a lot of time with them. And here's the other interesting thing is Dr. Jenks was very liberal,
mm-hmm.
And Dr. Meitzen was very conservative. And I ended up going bear hunting in Montana with Dr. Meitzen after I graduated and got to spend like 5 weeks with him.
Wow.
Really got to pick his brain. and you're talking about guys that were, Ivy League educated too. And so getting that perspective, I still find myself, Dr. Meitzen passed away in the late 1990s. Dr. Jenks I haven't talked to for a while. And then I had another professor in my political science advisor, Dr. James Whisker. Had a big influence on me. In fact, he's the one that talked me into going to law school.
Wow.
I kind of was him-hawing around about whether or not I wanted to go to law school or not. Maybe I was going to get out and maybe even go ROTC or join the military or just get a job and save up money. And he went, "Oh, BS. You'll never do that. You'll get out and you won't go back, borrow the money and go on to law school." And so Dr. Whisker had a big influence on me on that by pushing me to law school right away. He's very conservative. He's written books on the Second Amendment.
Really? Nice.
And he's got 4 or 5 books on the Second Amendment, Dr. Whisker. So those 3 professors had influence on me, in college.
Nice. That's a good point, because I know in my life, I've got influences in different sections of my life, which is all, it's just natural, I think. But when I was a kid, I got those influences. And then when I graduated high school and went to the Marine Corps, I've got the military leaders that were my influences. Now, post-military, I've got, back to my family members or friends that are my mentors now. So, yeah, mentors change and come and go all the time. At least they have in my life, and I'm sure they have yours too.
But very similar. Because, yes, once I got out of law school, I was determined to come back to this area. One interesting thing, I don't want to forget this, because I mention this lots of times when the anniversary comes up. You may not know, but on December the 9th of 1977, my senior year in high school, our house burned down.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And it's, you probably saw the house the location, but it was a big white house. It caught on fire in the middle of the night. And all 6 of us, Dad was working midnights, so he wasn't there.
Yeah.
I was the oldest. I was 16. I was 17. And Mom woke us up, and the back of our house was on fire.
Wow.
Now, we had plenty of time to get out, but we weren't able to get much of our stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting, it's one of those life-changing moments. I went to a neighbor's house and kind of got cleaned up. In fact, it was Joe and Mary Jane Wilson.
Okay.
Two people that had a big influence on my life. Frank Wilson is their son, and Frankie.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They had the big dairy farm that I lived beside of. Great people. And anyway, I kind of smelled like smoke, and of course I'd help the firefighters. It took a long time for the volunteer fire department to get out there, and they couldn't save our house. And I remember the feeling of, I had a pair of old work boots on that I'd thrown on, a pair of old blue jeans, an older type Carhartt type jacket, and an old sweatshirt. And I thought, well, I need to take a shower, but I don't have anything to change into. I was lucky that I had a car, and I'd saved my school books and my varsity jacket and a few things in my car.
Oh, man.
And that's a feeling that not very many people have. When I see a natural disaster out there, and people lose stuff, I know what that feeling is.
Yeah.
Now, to get to the rest of the story is, and a thing that had a big influence on me staying here in this area, is within a few hours, just a few hours, we had a room full of nice stuff that people donated.
Man.
I mean, and by the end of the day, the next day, and by the end of that week, within 3 or 4 days, people had donated over $5,000.
Wow.
Which this was 1977. Right. It was like $10,000. And I don't know what the donations ended up being. We had insurance.
Yeah.
Not enough. Nobody ever has enough, I guess. But we were able to put people's donations, both money and in-kind donations, and got restarted. I actually graduated from a mobile home there at Payne's Mobile Home Park. Yeah. And then we started our house, our new house that spring, the one that you probably saw. It's still there. But I always thought, I want to raise my family here.
Yeah.
Because that community spirit, and it wasn't just Pennsboro, Harrisville, St. Mary's, Parkersburg. Mm-hmm. One of the things we've lost in Parkersburg, Dill's department store gave my mom a $200 gift certificate.
Wow.
I thought, you're not going to get a $200 gift certificate from Walmart. No. Well, maybe you will, but I don't know. Yeah. but not from a big chain store normally.
Yeah.
Well, here's a good example. We had just bought a new TV from Montgomery Ward's, a new TV with a warranty on it. Dad went back to buy another TV at Montgomery Ward's to replace the one that burned up in the fire. They wouldn't honor the warranty. So he ended up not buying a TV at Montgomery Ward's. But all that kind of stuff, that was a big moment in my life that I realized I appreciated what I had with the local people. And you just can't tell me, people can say bad things about West Virginia. Maybe a lot of it's true. I don't know. But I know my experience, my family's experience, you just can't replace that.
I agree. Our area is one of a kind. And I told, you the story a little bit, but a lot of my friends that, have learned about my history and where I grew up from just almost can't believe that we come from an area like this.
Oh, yeah. And when we got started rebuilding our house, people come out and would help on the weekends, volunteer. One of the particular times was when we actually got ready to put the roof on. We had 8 or 9 volunteers out there. We were just pounding away, and it was a summer after my senior year of high school. And we managed to get it almost 1 year to the day. We were able to move back in to our house. It wasn't finished, but we were able to move back in with the help of volunteers and, of course, doing it ourselves. Wow. Of course, Chris was only 1 year old. Yeah. And so Mom, I was the oldest, but we had so that was a seminal point in my life that I thought, if I owe it to this community to come back here and do what I can to pay it forward what I've been paid.
Absolutely. That's a good point. Very good point. How would you describe yourself to someone that doesn't know you? Let's say you meet somebody at a football game somewhere and for whatever reason they want to know about you. What are you telling them? How are you going to explain yourself to them?
Well, I've been doing it here today. In a way, Steve, we don't know each other very well. We know of each other. Yeah. The things that are important to me, I guess, is I'm a family man. I'm a West Virginian. My rural heritage, is important to me. I'm easygoing. I I'm a judge, but I'm not judgmental.
Sure.
I mean, I consider myself conservative politically, a little bit libertarian, maybe leaning. I mean, I don't hate anybody. I'm tolerant.
Yeah.
Things of that nature. I'm quietly very religious. My faith is probably the most important thing to me of all.
Amen.
And I'll go into another story. That little Finch church that sits on the hill on Route 16. This was before the house burned down. The summer before the house burned down, I'm sitting there, 17 years old. I'm wanting to go leave. They were having a gospel sing there. And my mom wanted me to go, and my grandmothers. Both my grandmothers were there. They were sitting in the front row. Schofield, Tallman. Grandma Schofield, Grandma Tallman. And I'm sitting clear in the back. When you're 17, where do you sit when you're in church? You're sitting back, right?
Yep. I still do it.
So I'm sitting there. Yeah, I'm sitting there. But the music was good. It was the Williams family from here in, I don't know whether you're familiar with them, in Wood County or not. One of the members of the family works at the courthouse now in the top floor in the voters registration.
Okay.
Melanie. And anyway, I'm sitting there, and they're pretty good. They're younger. And they gave an altar call. I tell my kids this. I tell everybody. I said, I'm sitting there. It's an August afternoon. I don't know how I got from the back of the church to the front of the church on my knees.
Yeah.
Hands in the air, praising God. Yeah. I mean, it was a born again moment with the Holy Spirit. And it defined me the rest of my life. I'm going to get choked up because this always chokes me up. My two grandmothers were right there. And they turned, the first persons I turned around to look at, and they got tears in their eyes. And they were both in their 80s then, and they come up to hug me. My mom wasn't there because my brothers were little and I had and of course my dad wasn't there, but my grandmothers were. And it just, I ended up getting married in that little church. My wife and I,
nice,
in 1997, went back to get married in that church.
That's awesome.
And of course my mother's married up there right now too, and my relatives on the Schofield side on my mom's side. But I always feel like that little church is my stairway to heaven.
Yeah. I can remember that. When I finally committed and got saved. Oh my, what a feeling.
I mean, I would be remiss when you're asking me about myself if I didn't include that. And I've run in. You probably have too, especially being in service now. You run into a lot of people who, faith, how do you know there's a God? And I'll tell them that story.
Yeah.
I say, you guys can believe what you want.
Right.
You know me, but I said, that's what happened to me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I said, I had a born again experience and you can't tell me there's not a God.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't always been a perfect Christian after that.
Sure. Nobody has.
But in times of trouble, I draw on it.
Right.
I draw on the Holy Spirit. I draw on my faith. And that's what gives me inner strength. That's what gets me through the days sometimes as a family court judge. I'll segue back into my job. One of my favorite, I would call it a quote, saying is the Serenity Prayer.
Nice.
I have it on the wall in my private office behind my bench. I look at that Serenity Prayer every day.
Nice.
Because that's how I do my job.
Yeah.
Because I can't change everything.
Right.
But I try to do what I can.
Sure.
And try to do the best I can. You try to give every individual case. Mm-hmm. You might have 15 cases that day.
Right.
Every one of those people deserves your best.
Man.
And you hope you give it to them, but you got to try.
Yeah, that's.
And sometimes, you're not getting everything and you're not able to do everything you can. But then, you have to, back to the Serenity Prayer, you have to accept what you can change.
Man, that's motivating. That gave me the goosebumps.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, you have a very, very important job in the community, in the nation, in the world. I mean, you're dealing with things that are changing people's lives, either for the good or for the bad, all the time, every day. And I got so much respect for that. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on. I've always been interested in the law side of things, and you're making, like I said, you're making decisions that are permanent. They're going to affect everybody involved every day, and I want to pick your brain about some of that stuff today. What is something about you that might surprise others if they knew about you?
I saw that question that you sent to me, and I was thinking about it. Sometimes it's what we just talked about.
Yeah.
Because I can be a man of the world, and stuff, and it's I'll have a beer with the guys and stuff like that. So my deep faith sometimes it surprises people who don't know me very well until we get into a deep conversation like you and I are talking.
Yeah.
My taste in music is so broad that's what surprises some people. I might pull out a song, or a song might come on the radio, and there's Dad. That's silly, and so that's probably what's some people would be surprised. Is some of my taste in music. I mean, the Eagles are my favorite band,
nice.
And that's generally the genre that I like the best.
Okay.
Is anything with that, but I just never know.
Yeah.
I mean, I like I wanted to do a TikTok with that. What was that last summer? The Get Up song.
The Get Up song?
Yeah.
Oh my.
I wanted to do a TikTok to that. And they're like, my kids were like, please, Dad, don't,
You have TikTok?
No, I did. I started it, and then when they said it was, I deleted it from my phone. But I like the concept of
it. Is hilarious. I have it mainly because my daughter's almost 14. So I told her, I said, you can have TikTok, but guess who's going to be your follower? And that's me. So, I watch everything she does on it. Of course, who knows what she does and really does. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, some of it's really funny. My kids, have made some, but then they're afraid that I'm going to. And yeah, I wanted to do a Get Up video there in summer 2019, and because I thought that song was hilarious. So that's something was probably people would be.
Yeah, that's funny.
The silly side of me,
I like it that you like a lot of different music, and I love music. Obviously, you can tell looking around here in my studio, but I love music, and I like the harder rock type thing, or the real crunchy, like blues stuff. But man, if it's good and it sounds good, has a good melody, I love it. And I don't care what it is. I don't care who's singing it. If it's good, I like it.
I think I grew up in a really lucky time. I mean, when I graduated from high school, it was Boston, REO Speedwagon, Journey. I'm going to leave some of them out. But I mean, there was all these wonderful rock bands. Pink Floyd come out with The Wall, you know, and it was like every other month, and I still have most of those albums too. I probably joined Columbia Records about, you probably don't even know what that is.
I absolutely do.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
I joined Columbia Records and got 5 free albums, and then when cassettes come out, I joined them again and got 5 free cassettes, and then we went to CDs, but yeah,
they got your money again, didn't they?
Yeah, but yeah, I grew up in a time. I look back now and I'm thinking, wow, and I got to see a lot of those bands in concert too.
Wow, that's impressive.
I'm jealous. In the 80s and early 90s, and it's interesting now because my kids have discovered it, and it's mostly because of me. I mean,
sure.
I have a pretty nice stereo. I've got old Bose speakers downstairs that a client gave me. I did his divorce for his Bose speakers. You want a funny story? I did a divorce one time for a shotgun. So he was going to pawn it,
Right.
And he goes, well, I'll have to go pawn my gun. I said, well, just bring it in here and let me take a look at it. It was a pretty nice shotgun. And I was like, and it was an uncontested divorce. Him and his wife didn't really weren't fighting over anything. And I'm thinking, I kind of told my secretary, and so, I did these divorce for a shotgun.
That is hilarious. Oh, my gosh.
I still have the shotgun, dude.
Oh, my gosh. Here's another question for you. That kind of leads me into this one. What are some of the misconceptions that people have about being a judge?
Here's the misconception. It's more not about being a judge, about court in general. They often think that if they can just get into court and they'll convince that judge and the judge will just jump all over the other side. So what happens is, I'm setting up my little bench. My courtroom's kind of small. It's kind of like a Judge Judy kind of situation.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's very, very close to that. and one side will get to talking and the other side will talk. And you can see sometimes the disbelief in one side's eyes. They're like, they can't believe. They thought they were just going to come in and crush,
Yeah.
And then the other side gets to talking. And it's funny, sometimes I'll even have them interrupt going, Judge, are you just going to let her or him lie like that? And I look at them like, both sides they're surprised of the effect, and they realize the effect it has on me because they realize, I may not have a sure thing here because the other side's
It's
got
hammering
evidence
down,
too. Yeah. So I think that's one of the misconceptions people have. Oh, if I can just get into court, the judge will believe me. I don't have a truth detector. I mean, we have.
That's right.
You do the best you can.
Yeah.
And sometimes a person will say, I swear, I'll take a lie detector test. Usually I'll look over and say, I'm the lie detector.
Yeah. It's physical.
and often, and oftentimes you just have to do the best you can in trying to ascertain. You don't get every case right, but you try. Again, back to what I said, you try the best you can.
Sure.
And sometimes there's no shortcut. You can't be Judge Judy and find out in 15 minutes.
Right.
Sometimes it maybe take several hearings, or sometimes you may find out stuff. And in family courts, sometimes, especially if they have children, they may come back as the children get older or as different things change. And you might find out that something you thought in the original hearing or was presented did turn out to be not the truth.
Yeah.
Or a big thing changed. And you have to have to do a 180, maybe from one parent to the other.
Yeah.
And that and especially with this opioid epidemic we've had, that's happened. Unfortunately, I've seen that's changed my job a little bit.
I bet. It's getting bad too, isn't it?
Parent that was pretty good 5 or 6 years ago, come back in and that parent's in jail or in rehab or worse, and you have to make a change. And I would go back and look through the file or look through my notes, and I'm thinking, what happened?
Yeah.
And that's what it is.
Wow. I can't imagine.
That started about 8 years ago, I'd say.
It's getting crazy. And, I'm an outsider, obviously. I don't see it like you do every day, but it's getting bad around here.
The opioid epidemic was something that really changed my job. We always had it. I mean, you always had cases. I mean, a lot of divorces that were caused by alcohol abuse or drug abuse. I mean, drugs have always been there from the time I practiced law, 80s, 90s, up through when I got to be judge in 2003. You always had cases that had that aspect to it. One side having a substance abuse problem,
right,
or both. But it got. I don't want to exaggerate, but it got 5 or 6 times worse. One of the illustrations is we do one thing called guardianships. And historically, a guardianship was a single parent in the service getting shipped overseas would be one. And that service member come in and say, while I'm deployed, I want my parents to have my child.
Right.
15-minute hearing, everybody agrees, and away they go. It's just, for medical reasons. Or maybe a parent going to jail or something like that. And I would have about 10 a year of those, about one a month, maybe one a month. Our numbers have averaged in Wood County of those kind of cases. They jump to over 100.
Wow.
I have one almost every week.
Oh my gosh.
And sometimes 2 or 3 a week, where a grandparent comes in. Yeah, they're easy hearings, but they're sad.
Yeah.
And I tell people, I said, some of the easiest hearings for me are some of the saddest for the children. And that's my empty chair cases.
Yeah.
One parent comes in and says, Judge, I need to have custody, or a grandparent, and there's nobody on the other side. Now that's a 10-minute hearing for me. But you know what that means?
Yeah.
There's no parent there. Sometimes I tell people, I tell people this all the time. And sometimes I tell this when I talk to kids. I have to talk to a lot of kids about which parent they want to live with. And I'll give this little speech. I said, the good news is this child has 2 parents here who evidently love this child or children very much because they're here.
Yeah.
They're both here, and they're both, they're going to knock heads and whatever. But in the end, we want to try to do what's in the best interest of the child.
Right.
But at least there's 2 parents. And you hope that in some way, and a lot do, they come to some sort of equilibrium or some truce, where they can kind of co-parent and raise their children.
Yeah.
And that means that child has resources with both parents. But this opioid epidemic has accelerated those children who don't have maybe even either parent. And they're being raised by a grandparent who's doing the best they can, who's a dear person usually, usually can provide a safe home, maybe for the child, but not the optimum thing that our society ought to have.
So I don't even know if there's an answer to this problem yet. I mean, everybody that's it's in the community is trying to figure out an answer or a solution or have ideas or opinions. What do you think?
It's
I mean, as a professional judge that's going on. I mean, how do we make this better?
One of the offshoots of being a juvenile drug court judge is we get sent to training, and I've been to some national trainings, and I've heard from the major experts and gotten trained and listened. And it's interesting because there's different approaches. I mean, there's approach where lock them up. And that's not all wrong. I mean, it sounds harsh, but sometimes people don't do anything until they get locked up, till they hit rock bottom.
Right.
Treatment. Well, treatment is probably the right way to go, but it's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a society, we're supporting and oftentimes treatment is only 35% effective.
Wow.
And some of the statistics are people go to rehab 3 and 4 or 5 times. And, you got professionals working at these rehabs. And if it's an in-person rehab, just think about it. They've got a bed and they're being fed. And you're talking $50,000 or $60,000 to send somebody through rehab.
Wow.
And where's that money come from?
That's
they're not being productive.
Yeah.
And so as a society, meanwhile, while the parent is getting rehab, the child's still getting older and suffering in the trauma of not having their parent there. I mean, I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what the answer is. It is our whole society probably needs to turn back to God.
I agree.
That's what we're lacking a lot of, because a lot of these people, the most successful rehabs I've seen are faith-based. I mean, I'm going to say that.
Yeah.
Because that gives you that inner strength, because these people, it really is an illness. And even sometimes the addicts themselves don't think so.
Right.
But it's something they got to deal with every day. I do the analogy that it's like diabetes. What happens to a diabetic if they don't take their insulin?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with drug addicts. They think, I'll do it on my own. A lot of them will do it all right for a week, month, whatever. But they seem to not be able to do it, on their own, because they don't have that tool. They don't have that inner strength to be able to do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I agree with you. I think a lot of it's the absence of faith.
And supporting. I mean, a lot of them don't have real good support system. They have to develop some sort of support system. But what's the best support system?
Yeah.
Your faith in God, and then after that, that's what church is for.
Right.
I mean, do you have to be a Christian? Do you have to go to church to be a Christian? No. But it's a lot easiher. It
is. Yeah. Your support system is huge.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of these addicts end up lacking. They end up lacking that support system. And I don't know, that's probably going to be the solution. I mean, we've got to they talk about the war on drugs being a failure. I think we got to keep fighting it.
Yeah.
I mean,
we can't give up.
You can't give up. You got to keep fighting. You got to keep what you can off the streets. Legalize marijuana is a big mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell kids all the time, it's not your grandfather's marijuana anymore. Right. It's been genetically modified. This stuff coming out of Colorado now is, back in the day in the 60s, 70s or whatever, marijuana had THC content of 6-7%. Now it's 27, 28%. Genetically modified.
Oh my gosh.
And so, it's not, and this crystal meth this crystal meth is a really difficult problem, because what we don't realize, non-addicts, I had, and if we got time, I can tell you this story. This is
Absolutely.
A story that I like to tell in court, because it hit home something for me, because a lot of us go, why these people, what? We had a judge, we had a fellow that was about my age, and he was a judge at a training about 10 years ago. And he looked at us and he said, you all have no idea. And he was a recovering addict, and he was about 50 years old, and he was a recovering addict, and he had been a horrible heroin addict 15 years before, in his 20s, and in his probably even up to his 30s. And he had struggled and struggled and struggled. And he talked about, his family must have had money, because he talked about being in rehab in Denver, Boston, Atlanta,
Jeez.
in Canada. How he got started is he was in a little private college in Oregon or Washington, and he was a sophomore in college, and he was at a professor's party. And he went upstairs to a bedroom, and he saw some people kind of doing something, and they said, "Here, you want some?" And it was heroin.
Oh, man.
And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, my goodness, it was the best feeling I ever had."
Gee whiz.
And this is what he told us. He said, and he said, "I did it. It was great." And he said, "I didn't do it again until somebody offered me a couple months later. I did it again." He said, "After the second time, I was hooked." Now, he said, as you all were sitting there, on a scale of 1 to 10, if a good meal is a 2 or 3 and great sex is a 4 or 5, he said, cocaine's a 7, crystal meth's an 8, but he said, I'm telling you, heroin's not on the scale.
Wow.
He said, you all don't know how good it makes you feel. And I thought, that's it. That's where you or I wouldn't get it.
Yeah.
Because these people in my court will look at me, and when I tell them that story, they'll nod their head yes to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's how hard the problem is.
Mm.
I mean, people who drink alcohol, you get drunk, and you don't feel good the next day, and you're like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I've never had, I have no idea, but they said, you have no idea.
Man.
And I've talked to some other addicts about that, and they said, oh, you have no idea how great cocaine is. And crystal meth. I had a young lady tell me, she said, you don't understand. I can clean my whole house. I can go to work. I can take care of my kids. Everybody thinks I'm super mom. And then I can still go out. And I don't get hungry, so I lose weight.
Oh, my gosh.
And I thought, this stuff's going to be, when I heard that, I thought, this stuff's going to be hard to stamp out.
Yeah.
And you're not drunk, especially on meth. Everybody thinks you're
a functional person.
You're
really.
functioning,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, cocaine and meth can increase your IQ, can make you can do well on tests for temporarily.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Wow.
mean, there's a cost to all that. That's why the problem's so hard, is
Yeah.
because the stuff works.
Mm.
It makes you feel better, at least at the beginning.
Yeah.
Once they're hooked, they're hooked.
Yeah.
Then it's
And
a miserable experience.
It's a spiral down from there.
Mhm.
When you're deciding cases, or whatever you're seeing, are you sympathetic to people, for whatever reasons they might have before you decide on the verdict or whatever it is that you're.
You have to listen.
Mhm.
I mean, and sometimes I'll have even attorneys get frustrated with me because I will maybe let somebody ramble like I am here today, but and they're like, objection. And I was like, I'll overrule the objection because the other side maybe doesn't have an attorney. They don't understand the rules of evidence and stuff.
Sure.
I let them ramble. I let them get their story out. And the attorneys that practice in front of me have learned that that's what I'm doing. Now, I haven't ignored the law
Yeah.
or the rules of evidence. It's just that
You're listening.
I'm listening.
Yeah.
And yes, and once they get their story out, it may or may not be helpful, but at least they've gotten to tell their story.
Right.
And sometimes you are sympathetic, but you have to gently tell them that, well, the law says I can't do what you want me to do.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, lots of times in divorces, it's not the question of two sides getting along. It's one side wanting out.
Right.
And you get the person who doesn't want the divorce sitting there, very heartbroken, saying, Judge, I disagree with this divorce. I don't want divorce. Make them go to counseling with me. I don't have power to do that. I mean, and that's I can be sympathetic.
Sure.
And maybe take a little bit of time with them, recognizing how hurt they are. But you can't. You have to move on.
Sure, the law is the law.
Mm-hmm.
What about like your political beliefs or your religious beliefs? Does that come into play when you've got a case that's kind of, I know you still have to follow the law, but, there's a little bit of wiggle room, I guess. Do you let that in to your decision-making process or is it strictly by the law?
You certainly can't say it out loud. But, back to my faith sometimes gives me the strength to reason clearly.
Mm-hmm.
to try to kind of mesh what I've heard together and try to be as creative as I can within the bounds of the law.
Yeah.
In being sympathetic and coming up with a workable, solution in a case, or at least being able to try to say the right things. I mean, sometimes I think, Lord, give me the right words to say here.
Sure.
And make the right ruling. But yeah, I mean, they do. And it's kind of interesting. I think I probably have always been a lifetime Republican, lifetime conservative, but I think my job as a family court judge has affirmed my conservative beliefs.
I agree with that.
Because you see the destruction that's caused by dissolution of a family.
Mm.
Even children that are children of good divorces where the parents get along, I think suffer from the divorce. They lose the everyday input from both parents.
Yeah.
And of course, if there's any kind of conflict, it really affects the children. And it even affects the individuals involved. I mean, financially, certainly,
right.
It's way more expensive to run two households on the same incomes. And usually both parents now, take a dive financially. And it's tough. And then, of course, you get maybe one parent wanting to move away. But sometimes I will point out to people that I didn't bring you here.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point.
The ideal would be for you all, and sometimes I'll see attorneys kind of roll their eyes. There he goes again. I said the ideal would be to raise your children, together, in one home. Or I'll tell people, I get a lot of people who weren't married that have children. And I'll point out, especially to the fathers sometimes, I was like, well, you didn't make a commitment. The two of you all didn't make a commitment to raise this child together.
Mm-hmm.
All you did is just have a child.
Right.
You made no commitment. So I'm not surprised that you're here.
Mm. Have you ever, in cases like that where you get a little bit aggravated, maybe, I'm not saying that case aggravated, but you get a personal connection to this, I'm sure, right? Have you ever been like seeing repeat people come through that door and just be like, all right, I'm laying down the heavy wood today.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's time to make an example. The heavy wood's coming out.
Yeah, we have repeat people. And you try to, everybody thinks it's funny when I get mad. And I actually sometimes get mad at myself when I do get kind of angry. But, and you try to measure it and try to only go off when you really think it's going to do some good.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some people that it's not going to do any good because they're just not capable. Just make your decision and get them out of the courtroom. But there's some that you can sit down and go, look, you got to support your children. You got to do this. This is the most important thing you're going to do in life.
Yeah.
You've got to do it. And yeah, when somebody's disrespectful to me.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes I've had to get pretty loud. Oh yeah. Once in a while they'll let a 4-letter word slip, and sometimes I've had the situation where they're kind of grumbling under their breath going out of the courtroom, and my bailiff hears it. And I said, officer, I need for you to have them turn around here and tell me, they need to tell me what they just said.
Wow.
And
that's cold. I bet that hurts, doesn't it? I mean, the person leaving.
It happens. I mean, they're emotional hearings. And there's been some people who they get mad and they say, oh, I'm leaving, F this. And they get up and they start walking out of the room. And I'll tell them, bailiff, sit him back. The times I'm thinking of is some men. Sit him back down there. And then I'll look at him and I'll say, look, you may not like what's happening here today, but your children deserve to have you in their life. Now, when you get whatever it is, maybe more evidence against the other parent, or maybe the other parent will play out what that person's trying to tell me. Again, I have to rule on evidence.
Sure.
And lots of times people just think they're just going to come in and throw the case at me. Well, of course they're awful. Judge, can't you see that she's an awful No, I get a snapshot. I get a 15-minute snapshot sometimes.
Yeah.
But I'll set them down and like, look, you may not like what happened today, But 2 years from now, you may need to come back in here and get custody. You need to stay involved, and you need to sit here and fight for your child.
Awesome.
And if you have to fight with me to do it, then fight with me. But you're not going to just walk out the door.
Yeah. Don't quit.
Don't quit.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. It was kind of like a little drill sergeant kind of thing. It's like, no, you might hate what I'm saying now, but you need to listen.
That's awesome. Have you ever, with whether it's lack of evidence or lack of time on a case or whatever, felt a little maybe uneasy about the decision you've made, or maybe even made a wrong decision that later on you didn't know was, you didn't know it was wrong at the time, but say 2-3 months down the road, you're like, man, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah. Again, we're like a computer, junk in, junk out.
Right.
I mean, it depends, and maybe you don't get the truth all the time. Surprise, surprise.
That'd be tough.
And you find out later. I mean, most of the time, I kind of feel kind of proud that I think most of the time I've gotten things right. But oftentimes there's been cases that I've seen person's name in the paper a few months later and going, oh my goodness, he or she was right. The other side is a drug addict. They're there or a druggie because there they are in the paper, getting arrested or on the news. And of course, then the next day I'm getting that emergency motion, and I don't really do a whole big mea culpa, but I'll congratulate that party. I was like, well, you hung in there, so here's your custody today, or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, you don't get it all right because you don't have that. You don't have the evidence.
Well, at the point in time, you're just getting, like you said,
you do the best you can.
You're getting a smoke screen half the time, and half that smoke screen is the biggest lie you've ever heard, and that'd be hard to do because, you're an evidence-based decision maker. And if they're giving you a bunch of BS.
One of the scenarios we see lots of times is young people maybe not getting married, and they're both kind of free spirit kind of people. And, they have the child, and both of them move on. Mother moves in with new boyfriend, and father, he moves on to his new girlfriend. And then they come to me when the child's 6, 8, 9 months old. And the father, I want 50-50 custody. Well, the mother's sitting there going, well, I'm the one that had the child. and this is a phrase I come up with that's totally not a part of the law, but I think it maybe should be. I think fathers start off 9 months behind mothers.
Yeah.
And in an ideal situation, we spend the rest of our lives keeping up or catching up. But you can catch up. And in an ideal situation, and I know I am with my kids, in an ideal situation, the father's probably always going to be in second place, but not by much.
Right.
And so, I'll tell that father who, the child's now a year old and he's missed out on a lot, but he thinks it's his right, I need 50-50. But you got the mother sitting there going, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Who fed the child? And I'll start asking those questions. Well, who changed all the diapers? Who's fed the child? Who's made the child's doctor's appointments? Oftentimes fathers can't name pediatricians.
Yeah.
Who's had to arrange for babysitters when either parent worked? Inevitably, it's the mother.
Yeah.
And they'll look at now. What happens is, so then that father, he's a little put off by that. But that's how the law works too. And you got to realize that mother has already done a lot for that child. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, and I see a lot of cases where, the child's 1 or 2 years old by the time they get to court. Now, what that father can do, now that mother, I guess back to my point, that mother may have some questionable habits. And the father thinks he can come in with maybe only sporadic contact with the child and say, she's an awful mother, give me custody. He's not been around her maybe for a year or so. He doesn't know the ins and outs. He just knows general.
Right.
Or maybe what she was like when he was with her.
Yeah.
If he had any bit of a history with her. So I might do a original order, a first order where he's getting a little bit of time with the child. And then later on down the road, that mother really does show those problems that he talked about, the evidence of it. And then he comes back in. And I mean, that's.
Has there ever been a case where you've been personally affected by your decision? Whether it's somebody personally you might know or I don't know if are you allowed to see cases like that with people?
No, not generally, but sometimes you get to know people pretty well.
Yeah.
You get to know people pretty well because they've been in front of you a long time, or it's a case that's lasted all day, and you've gotten to know a lot about the kids and the family. Sometimes you do wake up in the middle of the night. You know, did I do the right thing, or what should I do if you're still making your decision? That's really a big part of practicing law too.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been able to leave my job at the office more as a judge than when I was actually practicing law, because there are people who are paying you, and you really do get to know them, and you really get. I got more emotionally invested in cases when I was in private practice, and maybe too much so. In fact, I think my calling is to be a judge, because, you know, I would worry if I thought, is it something I did?
Yeah.
I always tell people, when I did a little bit of criminal law, they'd say, how can you represent these guilty people? I said, the guilty people are easy. It's the innocent people that are hard. Because if you truly believe your client's innocent, I mean, then you feel like it's up to you.
Sure.
And, you know, I admire some of the attorneys that can do major felonies one right after the other, because it bothered me. I mean,
I can imagine.
We've already just rambled. Maybe I'll come back sometime, but I had, I had some major felony cases early in my career that just kept me up at night. I mean, in fact, I preferred being a prosecutor because of it.
I hear you. Is there any one piece of evidence or any one specific part of that case that was like the worst thing you've ever seen and just shook you and, shook you up to where it's with you today type of thing? I know you can't really give me details.
I had a case early in my career where I was appointed to an older gentleman that was charged with abusing a young boy, 7 years old, sexual abuse. And I went down to the jail to talk to him. And the older gentleman was a little bit slow. I mean, he had some disability, and he had a prior. He'd had a prior 20 years before. So we went to the preliminary hearing. This is an amazing story. We went to the preliminary hearing, and I'm representing him, and they brought the 7-year-old little boy in. And they had some corroborating pieces of furniture and duct tape and stuff like that, along with and the little boy was able to describe the abuse from my client. And I went and talked after the preliminary, and of course they found probable cause, and I went to talk to the circuit judge after that, Judge Dan Douglas. And I said, Judge, I've got younger brothers. I said, I can't, this bothers me. I can't represent him. Judge Douglas looked at me and he said, it's not your job to have him found not guilty. Of course, my client was denying everything too. Yeah. He was denying, he didn't even know the little boy. He was denying it. And so Judge Douglas looked at him and he says, it's your job to see that his rights are protected, that he gets treated fairly by the system.
I hear you.
And because our Constitution is only as good as it protects everybody. Even a sex abuser deserves a fair trial, due process, and part of that due process is the attorney there protecting. Now, here's the rest of the story. It gets even more interesting. So I'm representing this guy, and I'm only 2 years out of law school. So I don't know what the prosecutors here thought or whatever, but I had a client that didn't want to plead guilty. They really didn't offer him any kind of plea. He's charged with 3 very serious felonies. He was already in his 50s, so anything was going to be a life sentence. I just prepared to go to trial. The morning of trial, we picked a jury, did our opening statements. They brought the investigating officer on. They did some of their little preliminary stuff. They brought the little boy in. And I'd heard his testimony at the preliminary hearing, but it was a different prosecutor trying the case in circuit court, in the trial, in the jury trial. Put the little boy up on the stand. Can you identify this man sitting over there? Little boy shook his head no.
Oh, boy.
And wouldn't testify to anything.
Oh, man.
And I'm sitting there going, I was stunned.
I bet.
I mean, the whole courtroom was stunned. What I found out, and then we had a recess for lunch. Now, after that lunch recess, they put the little boy back on the stand over my objection, and he was able to kind of spit the story out. Not as good as he'd done at the preliminary hearing. Now, there was about a 6-month time between the preliminary hearing and this jury trial. What I learned later was the prosecutor's office had dropped the ball, had not kept in contact with this family, and they figured that, Tallman's a young attorney. He'll probably plead his client out. I couldn't, because my client wouldn't plead guilty. He insisted on his innocence. So the family had moved. And what was going on behind the scenes when we were starting our trial was they were desperately had half the Pearsburg Police Department trying to find that family to get that and they rushed him in there without any preparation at all and put him on the stand.
Oh, man.
He was able to spit out the story in the afternoon. My client was convicted of 2 out of the 3 counts he was charged with. He was found guilty, which I knew the jury ended up hearing the evidence. But automatically, here I thought I might have reasonable doubt. Anyway, I'm sitting there at lunchtime, and I'm thinking, I may win this case, and I don't deserve to win it.
Oh, wow.
And it really told me the system. Yeah. I'm giving you an inside baseball kind of look at what can happen in our system.
Yeah.
That when you see, that lousy defense attorney, no, it hit home to me what the judge had told me. It's the prosecutor's job. It's the law enforcement's job to prosecute these cases and bring these cases. I was simply there to protect my client's right to a jury trial.
Yeah.
And I was able to have a closing argument then. I was able to say, was he telling the truth before lunch or was he telling the truth after lunch? And I didn't know. The jury and the little boy on the count that he was found not guilty, he couldn't testify to the 3rd count. So the jury, obviously the prosecutor did lose that 3rd count. It ended up not mattering. Of course, my client got a long time in jail. He probably was a danger to society. I mean, it was kind of sad. Like I say, it was a little bit sad because he was a little bit slow.
Right.
But was I convinced he was guilty? I'd heard the testimony. I had heard the evidence. But again, the difference between prosecutors and police officers almost dropping the ball. I mean, that's how things think. That's how those things can happen sometimes.
That's crazy. I mean, think about that. I mean, that case could have went either way.
Yeah.
I mean.
It could have went. Yeah, he could have walked. I mean, he was, you can't see on the radio, but I'm holding my fingers up, about 2 inches apart. He came this close to walking.
Wow.
In fact, the circuit judge was pretty upset with the prosecutor and said, I suggest that you have some more evidence this afternoon or this case is going to be dismissed.
Gee whiz.
And I'm like, I'm stunned. I'm 2 years out of law school, actually less, 1.5 years out of law school. And I'm like, I'm going to win this case and not really feel like, I would, and I thought, I did my job.
Yeah.
I'm doing my job, so I'm not going to feel bad about this.
Right. But still, at the end of the day.
I had a couple other cases, too, that kind of burnt me out on felony cases. So, but it did teach me when I went on to be a prosecutor after that, do your job.
Yeah.
If you do your job as a prosecutor, it'll
all make sense, right? If both parties do their job, it should make sense.
And as a prosecutor, you can look at the evidence, and if the evidence you don't think is there, you can call the defense attorney and say, hey, look, let's make a deal.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of cases are pled, because you might not have all the evidence you need for all the charges that maybe somebody's charged with, or, you have a little bit of sympathy for it might be a first-time offender or something, and you have a little more discretion as a prosecutor, than you have as a defense attorney. You kind of have to take it how it goes.
Right. So what made you become a judge? Later on, you're now the judge. Is there something in the prosecuting lane that steered you away from that, or you just said it's time to step up and do a different role for my community?
It's kind of funny. There was a combination of things that happened right about that time. In 2002, I was a sole practitioner in my little office across from TB's Dairy, a little brick house. My children had just been born. My son was born. I have a stepdaughter that was 93. She's about 9 years old at the time and was in school. And my son had been born in 1999 and my daughter had been born in 2000. So I had young children. But I was a sole practitioner. And so I had to hustle and you have to run a business. And I was making money, but it was always that, is it going to come in next month or not?
Yeah.
Is it going to come next month? And the combination is the state came along and was building the new highway in South Parkersburg, and it was slated to take my house as part of the highway down there.
Okay.
And when they came, and I'm thinking, I'm going to have to take out another mortgage. I'm going to have to move my office. Where am I going to move to? I had that rolling around. Plus, I was working 50 or 60 hours a week. I mean, at times I wanted to spend with my kids.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're in court, when you're a sole practitioner, you're in court during the day, you got to meet with your clients in the evenings or Saturday mornings.
Wow.
When you have to write up your preparation, lots of times you do it on Sunday evenings. So the family court judge job came up. I got a phone call from Jonathan Summers, who's from Ritchie County.
Mm-hmm.
He was the current judge at that time. And he said, Darren, I'm going to give this job up. I don't want to run for it. Why don't you run for it? And at first, I don't want to do that. I don't want to hear that all day. I like, and I was starting, I had settled some personal injury cases and I was kind of feeling it a little bit, thought I was going to make some money. But then my wife kind of started on me and my legal assistant. And they said, you're always wanting to spend more time with your kids. You can't hardly keep you here in the office because you're wanting. And I thought, wow, yeah, a 9-to-5 job, health insurance, and not having to go find another office, go buy another building, and move my office. I mean, I simply ended up closing my office down.
Yeah,
and selling my house to the state. And kind of putting that money away and not having to, it was kind of a combination of things. And of course, it was probably God working in my life too, that this is going to be your calling. But I was 42 at the time, kind of young for a judge, but not a whole lot. But it was just the timing was probably more than anything else. Probably a year before that, I wouldn't even have thought about it.
Yeah.
And if that time had passed and I was already into a new building somewhere else and my business was on the upswing by quite a bit in 2002. In fact, 2002 is still the best year I ever had financially as far as income.
Wow.
I took a pay cut to be a family court judge.
Yes.
But I've never regretted it, not a day, because I can go home at 4:30, 5 o'clock. Most days.
Most days, yeah.
And today, I had today off.
Yeah.
I had, and when my kids were growing up, Christmas time, if my kids had a ball game, probably shouldn't say this, but cancel my hearings tomorrow. I'm going to the ball game.
Sure.
When my son's team and my daughter's teams qualified for the state basketball tournaments, next Thursday and Friday, I'm going to be in Charleston, cancel everything.
Yeah.
I couldn't have done that in private practice.
Right.
I mean, it's just probably the biggest reason why. I think it was my calling, though, because I think once I got the job, I liked it. I still like it. I tell people about practicing law and, of course, about being a family court judge. You get burnt out sometimes.
I bet.
But you're never bored.
Yeah. Every
day's interesting. I mean, you can hear me ramble on here today. We could probably do 2 or 3 of these podcasts,
and
I have more stories to tell you because it is. Every day's interesting.
What is the number one court case that you see day in, day out? What is it? Is it drug related? What is it?
No, well, I mean, probably mostly divorces.
Divorces?
And one of the misconceptions is I have a lot of cases that are basically uncontested.
Okay.
I mean, I hear a whole slate of people who have already made up their mind, got their settlement. They just need to come in and put it on the record.
Make it official.
Yeah. And thank goodness for that. Now, as far as, tomorrow I'll have domestic violence cases. And I generally have 12 to 15 of those on a Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And they can range anywhere from somebody just verbally threatening to some really serious stuff.
I bet.
And so that, not every case I have is drug related. I mean, some of the more difficult custody cases there are. The the hardest cases that we have on our docket right now probably aren't necessarily the drug cases. It's where you have maybe two good people, but one person has gotten a job or their new significant other has gotten a job and they want to move away. Oh, those are hard cases.
That would be tough.
Because you might have one parent that's very established here in this area. The other parent has a great opportunity somewhere else. And they basically get along. Well, now you've got a rock and a hard place.
Oh, my gosh.
Those are the hardest cases we have.
Yeah.
Because they end up, and I hate it sometimes, because you end up slinging little arrows at each other, and it's not really necessary. I mean, you've kind of broken a whole dynamic there, and the law does give us certain parameters that we have to judge, when somebody wants to relocate, but those are the hardest.
That leads me into this kind of an idea that I've had. I wanted to ask you about. What kind of advice / mentorship do you give the community, your cases? What do you tell them that would help to, lower crime, lower drug activity, or lower, the separation rate of families? I mean, how do you mentor? Let's say me and my wife show up at your door in 2 months and we got all kinds of trouble. How are you going to mentor us as a first-time visitor at your courtroom?
Sometimes, let me tell you another story. I had a case early on in my career. Again, it was a sexual abuse case. The parties had like a 8-year-old little girl, and the parties had gotten divorced a couple years before that. And the parties came in and they had an agreement. I mean, the wife came in with her head down because it was her boyfriend or something that abused the child. The dad, he came in kind of a little bit cocky. And, and they're agreeing to everything. And they were working out some details. They had attorneys. And I ended up making the comment. I was like, well, why didn't you all two stay together? And the mother, she volunteered. She said, well, I cheated on him and he just couldn't forgive me. And he's like, yeah, I couldn't forgive that. I looked at him and I said, maybe you should have. And then you would have saved your little girl all this.
Mm.
He looked at me stunned because he had never thought of that.
Oh my gosh.
So that leads me to what I usually try to, when I've had friends, and yeah, I naturally, of course, my friends and family can't, but I end up, you're right, inevitably, because of the business you're in, you end up mentoring some people. Sometimes just forgive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes let stuff go. Work on it. All marriage is hard. I mean, work on it. Maybe listen to the other part. I mean, people sometimes come into me and they haven't listened to each other until they get in the courtroom.
Oh.
And I'll hear somebody say, well, you never told me that. And I'm like, why didn't he tell? These days with text messages and social media, there's no excuse for people not communicating.
Right.
And oftentimes they can avoid it at a whole court hearing if they would just communicate. Sometimes, one of the first divorces I ever did as an attorney, I had two people come in, and in the 80s, attorneys could do a divorce. You're not allowed to do this anymore, but you could represent kind of both sides. I mean, you could be the only attorney in the case. And I had this couple come in, and they were holding hands. And I'm taking their information. They had kids that were adolescent age or so. And I finally looked at them and I said, why are you all getting divorced? And I looked at the papers. They'd been separated a couple of years.
Mm.
And they said, well, we've already done our fighting. And now we're ready to get divorced.
Wow.
And I thought, okay. But yeah, I've mentored a lot of close friends of mine. And I was like, look, I know that he or she is this, and this. But I said, think of your kids.
Yeah.
Now, when there's no kids involved, just go get divorced.
Yeah. Get it over with.
Get it over with.
You guys don't get along.
Yeah, you don't get along. But when there's children, I think our generations in front of us, our parents, grandparents, I'm sure they faced the same kind of things we did. Maybe not quite on the scale because, it's a smaller world now. But, they found a way to work it out.
They did.
Or they forgave, or they overlooked some of the small stuff.
Right.
Now a lot of couples, the first time things get hard, it's like,
Yeah.
Let's run to court.
Right.
And they don't want to be told they're wrong either. So if I'm going to mentor somebody, I want to say, look, maybe you guys ought to really talk about this and really think about the kids and maybe you ought to forgive it.
Yeah. I agree with that. That lane of just communication is, you see it all the time, whether it's on, social media post or anything. People just don't have it. I mean, a majority of people don't. You see it all the time. And there's so many things that can be fixed. There's so many things that can change direction just with talking and listening to somebody. I mean, that's such a valuable, simple concept. And people don't do it. And it just boggles my mind.
There's been times that after an hour hearing, even the parties know how I'm going to rule because they've heard each other's side.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, why didn't you guys sit down? I mean, I think it a lot, and sometimes I say it out loud, but I'm thinking, okay, by the time they leave there, they're kind of have a consensus.
Yeah.
That, the judge is probably right.
Yeah.
Because they've heard both sides by that point. And there's no excuse anymore. I mean, that's one of the changes that's happened since when I first got to be judge in 2002 is the technology. Mm. I mean, you would laugh when me looking at people's phones now with the text messages between each other. And the name calling sometimes, it's funny because, you had plausible deniability before this, when you were just maybe yelling at each other and maybe somebody said, I didn't call her that.
Yeah.
And it's but when they're texting each other and they're calling each other those names,
yep.
And I can see that and I can look at them going, this is the mother of your children.
Oh my gosh.
Or this is the father of your children. And they're actually, they'll show a little bit of shame.
Yeah.
But that's one thing that's changed is the technology. I get Facebook posts and Instagram posts and pictures and text messages, recordings, video recordings on a phone, and stuff like that. Sometimes it's pretty valuable because sometimes you see the real person sometimes too.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to mention that. The volume of evidence now is humongous, really, if you include all that social media stuff. I mean, everybody's got a page on every daggone site, and if you're trying to tell a lie to a judge and he pulls up all of your social media and calls you out on it, oh, man.
you were talking about some of the funny things that happens, but it is kind of funny when somebody comes in and maybe they're dressed real nice and they'll sit there kind of real meek, whatever. And then the other side will play the video or the recording. And I'm like, and you really can't fit the recording with the person that you're seeing in front of you. You're like, holy cow, this person's a real fireball outside of court. They're not this little meek thing that they're presenting here in court or this real polite person that they're showing in court.
That's got to be tough.
They're busted.
Yeah, because you're filtering through all the BS of a lie and a story. And oh my gosh, I don't know how you do it. What do you think your biggest accomplishment thus far in your life is, whether it's, your professional career or your personal life?
I think my biggest accomplishment is being a good husband and father. I mean, another life-changing experience for me was when my children were born. I was already, my stepdaughter made me a father, but to see the miracle of life and be right there, it affected me in ways I didn't expect. And of course, it gave me an appreciation for my wife.
Yeah.
I was there in the room when they were born and seeing what my wife went through. I thought, I can never make this up to her.
It's crazy, isn't it?
And of course, my wife had difficult pregnancy with my children. And, even at times if she tries my patience, I got to go back and go, look what she did for me.
Right.
Look what she had to go through to bring these children here. And so being a good husband, good father, brother, son, friend, I think is the biggest accomplishment I have. And I would like to think that I do the best I can, in my professional career too, that I give people my best.
Yeah.
You don't always feel your best, but you've got to try the best. I try to give everybody my best every day. That's my biggest accomplishment.
That's awesome. I agree with that 100%. Being a great husband, father, son, friend, just being a good human is so valuable in life. And nobody has to be, a judge. I don't have to be the president to be the hot topic. You can be a great, insert your title wherever it applies, whether it's just whatever it is that you do, just be great at it. Just work hard, ask for forgiveness, listen, say you're sorry. Those basic techniques of life, they're just so valuable. Judge, man, we've covered a lot of topics today, and I want to thank you. I really appreciate you coming down. We haven't talked to each other in a lot of years, and it's probably been brief when we did.
Probably since you were in high school playing for the Richland County Rebels.
That's it. Like we said earlier, his younger brother and I graduated high school together.
Little League. I saw you playing Little League.
That's right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I
remember your dad Justin coached you too.
That's right. Yeah, he did.
That was one of the fun things is I got to coach my kids too. And I didn't want to do it. They pulled me into doing it.
Yeah.
When my kids were at Pearsburg Catholic, and I coached them in 5th and 6th grade basketball. And my son, he just, of course, I'd bench him when I wouldn't bench the other kids. And he always said, but that's what you do.
Yeah.
They hit what his friends love to bust on me for is when I was coaching them one time in basketball, I heard one of the parents go, that's okay. And I had him over in a huddle and I go, it's not okay. Not okay. Not everything's okay. Those bunch of boys still, bust on me for that. But it's true.
It is true.
It's not everything's okay. Don't give everybody a trophy,
right.
Stuff like that.
I'm with you. Yeah.
and that's what I love about high school sports. Get me another thing is my drug court kids. I try real hard with them. I think a lot of the problem with them is they don't have enough to do.
Right.
Again, back to our Richland County roots. My goodness, we were busy when we were in school.
You daggone right.
I played all 3 sports. I got to play in the band. I was in the drama club. Do you remember Claire Snyder?
Absolutely.
She had a big influence on me. And bless her heart, she kept you busy and stuff. And we were busy.
Sure.
Not that we didn't get to have fun and do things,
Right.
But, these kids that I deal with drug court, they don't have a support system usually to start with, and then they don't get involved in anything. And I'm like, guys, go out for a sport. Go out for the choir. Run for student council. Do something.
Yeah.
And boy, it's just hard.
Don't waste your life away. There's all kinds of things to do.
Yeah.
Tons of things, especially with social media. You can be productive on social media, really. If you would.
I try to get the kids, what are you interested in? Paint me a picture, if you want to paint. I had one kid a few years ago write me a rap. It was clean, had to be clean, but it was actually pretty good.
Nice.
It was actually pretty good. He did it for us. It was pretty good. And I've had kids write poems in drug court and stuff. And, if I think they're, of course, I have them write papers and things like that. But, you try to, the kids have got to, kids today have it kind of tough. They don't have the home support system that we had growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the school itself, PHS and South are such big schools.
Right.
One of the reasons I sent my kids to Pearsburg Catholic is, one, I like the faith-based education, and it was a small school. And Pearsburg Catholic still had that Pennsboro feel to it.
Right.
It really did. And, of course, I see it now with my kids now being out of school. Their friends most of them are doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
Not perfect kids. I always said, I don't send my kids to private school because I think they're better than other kids. I send them to private school because I know they're not.
Right.
They could have fell into the same bad influences that other kids had.
Sure.
But, putting them in that environment had to have helped them.
Absolutely. Absolutely did. Well, Judge, this pretty much wraps up the show. And we've covered a bunch of topics.
Well, we have.
Yeah. And I just, like I said, I
knew we would. I told you last night. I said, I knew we would because I like to talk about family court. I'm enthusiastic about it. I don't know that people realize. There's a little bit of a veil, there, and family court, that's awful. The men always lose. No, you have to kind of step back and really look at it.
Yeah.
And I think I hope that some of the people who've been through family court then think, I get it now.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of horror stories like everybody, like you said, the fathers get hosed and the wives get all the money.
Yeah. Well, you've probably heard one side, but there's really a logical there's a logical basis for most laws.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, that law was made to address that certain situation.
Right.
And it might not be readily apparent now what that law was, reason it was there for. But there's usually a logical reason for it.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. All right, Judge, I'm going to finish this thing up. Hey, folks, if you like what you heard, subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends, tell your family. I plan on doing a show once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. But I want to thank my good friend, Judge Darren Tallman today. And I had a blast, Darren. Thanks for coming down.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, buddy. Hey, folks, until next time, be a good human, and we will see you later.